Uh, okay, so and then the last thing that is kind of a mechanic is humans and non-humans. Non-humans was a weird tribal element of mutate, but then they actually have tribal humans in black and white. I guess to give a little more dimension to the world and also to the gameplay, like you could do a black white wide thing. So you have these bigger mutate creature stacks. Whether that was correct to encourage or not. And then you have this other dimension of being able to go wide with black white humans. And I liked it more than I thought. And the caveat there for me is I hate human tribal. I think human tribal is one of the dumbest things you can have in a fantasy game. Um, that is, I mean, fantasy is escapism, whether that's like the most important part of any particular fantasy execution or not, escapism is kind of baked into it, right? Like the main draw of your game is that you can do goblins and elves and unique worlds. And what do you get rewarded for on these unique worlds? Having the most boring species matter the most, the humans. And I think that's like a betrayal of the fantasy genre to reward humans and collecting humans as this planeswalker, or whatever the flavor is of what we're doing when we're building our magic decks. And I understand having humans in a game like this because you want entry points. Players feel what's the term, like they like seeing people like them in their games. They like feeling like they're not alone in this big world where nothing is like them and they don't have those entry points. But encouraging that you collect all of your humans together and wanting lots of humans and not the goblins, like, oh, do I want this cool looking creature with really interesting fantasy art in my deck? It's not a human. I better not put it in there. You know, I don't like that.
Yeah, so I agree. I dislike both human tribal and especially non-human tribal, which we've seen a lot before. But I
Hmm.
actually really enjoyed, because of the way that humans and non-humans were both connected to mechanical elements of the set. I really enjoyed the of one mind style, rewarding you for having a human and a non-human.
Yes, I really liked that. The bonding style things. There was like the blue divination that costs 1 mana when you have a human
Oh,
and a
right, curving
non-human.
forbidden friendship into that felt so good. It was so exciting.
Yes. And I was surprised there wasn't more of that. Like I saw a few of those cards. I was like, oh, that's probably going to be one of the archetypes is pairing humans and non-humans. But it was just some kind of one-off designs to spice up the dimension of the set. And I wish that that had been more of a thing and not the uh, the the human tribal. Like I thought it was fine as like a single archetype. You can't judge a set off of one draft archetype. A lot of times they're just trying to make the set work, trying to make the draft experience smooth for everybody. But yeah, I wish Wizards would do this less. I think it is a failing of the game that for a long time the best non-combo deck in Modern was 4 or 5 color humans.
Agree.
Yeah, like, oh,
Yeah,
let's play this fun fantasy game. What's the best deck? It's humans. Like that seems weirdly species focused, in a weird way.
I really don't tend to like tribal, but I understand why tribal often ends up having to be a component of a set, because you need as many aspects of a card to matter as possible if you want to make a really rich set. So you need to have a card that means a bunch of different things to different decks. And it's just there's only so many spots on the card to care about, and we haven't had converted mana cost 3 matters yet. Uh, Toughness 2 matters or whatever. So uh, having a particular tribe matter just gives you an extra way to sort of say, okay, my card that has cycling 1 and is a 2/2 is also a human, and so that matter is just sort of becomes a necessity. Although they then get overly constrained, I think, by the flavor, because then, oh well, all humans are like 2/2 or smaller. So
Mm.
then you end up with collecting a bunch of tutus, which really constrains then what you can do. Whereas if your tribe was sorcerers or whatever, you could have like a kraken sorcerer and whatever, and you
Or
could
seven
more
mana cards.
right. You could maybe it would look even more like you're doing what they're doing, which is you just paint this paint coat of paint on this random collection of cards. But I think that that is something that allows them to make the set interconnect in a way that's part of what made Ikoria so interconnected, even though I agree I'm not a huge fan of the human tribal. At least what things were humans added an additional dimension to the cards to care about, and then intended to encourage you as you built your decks to think about that.
Yeah, I think I liked the humans as much as I did. Like as much as I was okay with them in this set, I liked it because they were mechanically focused on going wide, whereas the non-humans were mechanically focused on like going deep, if that makes sense. On at least on paper, right? The mutate stacks versus the going wide humans. And that way, they could still be small and be the size of normal humans, like you say, the 1/1s, 2/2s, occasionally a 3/2 or whatever. Um,
I
I
even feel like humans were really focused on like sacrifice in this set because you had like Bastion of Remembrance and Bushmeat Poacher. I
That's
sort of
true.
felt like that was the like I feel like there was a intended to be a go wide deck, but I never really saw it come together outside of times when like someone has gone off with a 3/1 cycling payoff
Hmm.
or really grinded someone into dust with the black white uncommon that made 1/1s. Although usually I found that it made 1/1s so that you could sacrifice them to Bushmeat Poacher, so that you could make a 1/1 so that you could sacrifice it to Bushmeat Poacher and then get your durable
Right,
coil
right.
bug back and sacrifice that to Bushmeat Poacher. Uh,
Yeah, a lot of
it's
bushmeat poaching there. A lot of bats being eaten in this format.
yeah.
Uh, but I liked. I mean, I saw some go wide, and I think go wide just naturally goes with the sacrifice. I think that's how they, black white is part of two wedges. It's part of the Mardu wedge, which I think used the wide tokens that were created by humans as sacrifice fodder, and then the Abzan side. I think they did some more of the go wide, although I'm not sure what go wide elements there were in green, so maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, I thought there at least some direction mechanically there that made it more okay. I will say that I appreciate an occasional tribal element in sets because in making my own custom sets, one thing I realized is that when someone is new to a set, they just having signposts isn't very helpful for them as far as like draft archetype signposts because that's not that interesting. Like, all right, I'm just waiting to be told what I'm supposed to do with the colors I'm in. They also like finding some linear strategies that they can decide in and of themselves to go deep on. So, like, if you see a Whisper Squad or you see like a human tribal common, you can be like, okay, I can, if I don't know what else is going on in this format, if I don't know what the best strategies are or what mechanics are important, I can at least know that these cards care about humans and I can evaluate cards that way. And I think that's useful for people getting into formats or people who just don't want to think as deeply strategically.
Agreed. Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of players like first pick a Goblin King and then take every goblin they see as their draft strategy. And
And that's fun
whether it
for
works
those
or not,
people.
it still gives them guidance, which helps them get through the draft, which then once they've played with the cards and played against the cards, then they have a sense of how good the cards are, and then they can maybe do it differently the next.
Yeah, one thing that I kept wanting to do, and over my 30 drafts or whatever, was go deep on Whisper Squad. And I didn't care if the deck was going to be bad or not. I just wanted to be past enough Whisper Squad so I could feel like I did the thing. And I think that that's a good moment to have in drafts as well. And Tribal helps make that happen more often.
I do
Uh,
love how bad Whisper Squad looks, even though it ends up secretly being really good in the format.
yeah.
I found that notable. But yeah, I think you and I used go wide in a different sense. Like I when I say go wide, I think I specifically mean you're planning to trumpet blast someone out by alpha striking. Whereas in this set, you went wide so that you had infinite blockers, so that you could throw a blocker in front of their big thing and then sack it to poacher before damage.
And kill him with
And so
Helica Glider, right?
like Sure. Uh, but
Maybe not
basically,
Helga
like,
Glider.
I have so many blockers, you're just never going to kill me, was sort of what ended up happening with the tokens in this set. I felt like more so than like there was that cycling trumpet blast, but
Yeah.
it was not very often that I coordinated charged someone to death outside of the cycling deck.
I kept trying to, and I think that's the difference between I think that's the reason why I had to grind currency to keep drafting, and you you did not, probably. But I had fun doing it anyway, uh, and I think that's okay. I think it's good for sets to look a little bit different at different skill levels. I think it's even healthy. Um, okay, so that's the mechanical rundown. Let's just overall, what did you think the overall mechanical suite? Companion kind of doesn't count as part of the mechanical suite from a limited perspective, but it's kind of how the set's going to be remembered also. So in that sense, it's left its stamp on the set in that way. So I guess we could consider it part of the suite. We've got mutate, keyword counter, cycling, and companion. Um, I think it was a pretty good package. I feel like keyword counters are innovative in a technical way, and I think led to some interesting and unique play. Mutate, we talked about, did some weird stuff to the format, and they executed it really well. Even if the mechanic maybe could have been smoother in some ways or emphasized different things that would have led to healthier play patterns, I think what they did have they used really well. And companion really made the draft very interesting, and make you feel like the decks have they feel a little more cubey, as you said earlier. You feel like you're building some really powerful, unique linear strategies that aren't your typical, just blue green ramp or red white go wide that you do in any other Magic format.
With the exception of companion, I felt like all the mechanics sort of just blended into the soup of the set in a way
True.
that was good. Like I didn't feel like any of them really stood out in the way like say Infect did in Scars of Mirrodin or some of the other examples where sort of like you have a really strong sense that like, oh, this was the set with this mechanic. Like all of them were sort of workhorses that really contributed to decks and the overall feel of particular decks, but none of them I feel like stand out in my mind as being part of the overall format in
Yeah.
a way that I think was good. It sort of let me build decks and play with these things. Now, Companion, of course, like completely altered the rules of the game in a way that and did stand out, but it was only on rares, so it was also in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that.